December 20th, 1943, 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The B-17 flying fortress known as Ye Olde Pub was dying in the sky. Half the crew was wounded. 2 engines were destroyed. The oxygen system had failed. The tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Ecke Eckenrode, was dead, still frozen in his shattered turret. 21-year-old Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, the pilot, could barely see through the blood running down his face. His co-pilot was slumped unconscious beside him. The bomber's nose had been blown apart by a direct flak hit. Through the gaping holes in the fuselage, the December wind screamed at 200 miles per hour. They had fallen 3 miles behind their formation. They were alone. And then Charlie saw it. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 sliding into position just 30 feet off his right wing. So close Charlie could see the pilot's face. So close the German could see everything. The blood, the wounded men, the destroyed aircraft barely staying airborne. So close there was no way to miss. The German pilot was Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, 27 years old. 27 confirmed kills. One of the Luftwaffe's rising aces. One more kill, just one, and he would receive the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. All he had to do was fire. The American bomber was defenseless. Half its guns were destroyed. The crew couldn't even bail out. Their parachutes had been shredded by flak. It was the easiest kill Franz Stigler would ever get. For 30 seconds, Franz's finger rested on the trigger, and then he made a choice that would haunt both men for the next 46 years. This is their story. Every word is documented. Every detail is verified. This is the true story of the most extraordinary act of mercy in the skies of World War II. December 20th, 1943 began like dozens of other missions for the men of the 379th Bomb Group, stationed at Kimballton Airfield in England. Their target? The Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen, Germany, one of the most heavily defended industrial targets in the Third Reich. This would be Charlie Brown's first combat mission as aircraft commander. At 21 years old, he was younger than most of his crew. He'd been promoted to pilot just weeks earlier after his original aircraft commander was killed over the North Sea. Now Ye Olde Pub, right? Dio. A battle-worn B-17F with over 20 missions already painted on her nose was his responsibility. His crew trusted him completely. His crew that morning consisted of Second Lieutenant Spencer Pinky Luke, navigator, 24 years old. Second Lieutenant Al Sadok, bombardier, 23 years old. Technical Sergeant Sam Blackford, flight engineer and top turret gunner, 26 Staff Sergeant Bertrand Frenchy Coulombe, radio operator, 22 Staff Sergeant Alex Yelesenko. Ball turret gunner, 20 Staff Sergeant Hugh Ecke Eckenrode, tail gunner, 21 Sergeant Richard Doc Pechout, waist gunner, 19, Sergeant Lloyd Jennings, waist gunner, 22nd Lieutenant Robert Andrews, co-pilot, substitute for this mission, 22, 10 men, average age, 21 years old. For most of them, this would be the day they almost died. At 0600 hours, the crews gathered in the briefing room. When the curtain was pulled back to reveal the red ribbon marking their route, a collective groan filled the room. Bremen. Flak City, the veterans called it. Over 250 anti-aircraft guns ringed the city. The Luftwaffe fighter bases at Oldenburg and Wiesbaden were close enough to scramble interceptors within minutes. Charlie listened as the intelligence officer laid out the mission details. Time over target, 1,145 hours. Altitude, 27,000 feet. Duration, approximately 6 hours round trip. Expected enemy fighters, heavy expected flak, intense and accurate. The briefing officer's final words were matter of fact. Stay with the formation. Don't fall behind. If you get separated, you're on your own. Charlie glanced at his crew. Pinky Luke gave him a thumbs up. Frenchy Coulombe cracked a nervous joke. None of them knew that within 5 hours, 8 of the 10 men would be wounded, 1 would be dead, and their pilot would be face-to-face with an enemy who should have killed them all. At 8:30 hours, 379th Bomb Group began launching their aircraft into the cold English morning. Ye Olde Pub roared down the runway, straining under the weight of 2,500 gallons of high-octane fuel, 6,000 pounds of bombs, 11,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. 10 men and their equipment, Charlie pulled the yoke back. The heavily loaded bomber clawed into the sky. They formed up over the English Channel, a massive aerial armada of 357 B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, escorted by P-47 Thunderbolt fighters. It was an armada so large it would take 30 minutes just to pass over a single point. As they crossed into German airspace at 10:30 hours, the P-47 escorts turned back. They were at the limit of their range. From here on, the bombers were on their own. At 11:42 hours, the formation reached Bremen. The flak began immediately. Black clouds of exploding 80mm shells erupted around them, each explosion capable of shredding metal and flesh within a 100-foot radius. The aircraft shuddered and bucked through the violent air. Flak at 12 o'clock level, someone shouted over the intercom. Charlie held the bomber steady. Bombardiers needed a straight, stable approach for the bombing run. No matter how heavy the flak, no matter how many shells burst around them, the pilots couldn't evade. They had to fly straight. And the Germans knew it. A direct hit. The nose of Ye Olde Pub exploded in a flash of orange flame and black smoke. The entire plexiglass nose cone disintegrated. Al-Sadaq, the bombardier, was thrown backwards, his face and chest peppered with shrapnel. Pinky Luke, the navigator, took a shard of steel through his right shoulder. "Jesus Christ!" someone screamed over the intercom. Charlie felt the controls go mushy as shrapnel shredded hydraulic lines. Warning lights blazed across the instrument panel, but they were still flying. "Bombs away!" Al-Sadaq gasped through blood-soaked teeth. The aircraft lurched upward as 6,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs fell toward the Focke-Wulf factory below. Charlie banked hard left to follow the formation out of the target area. That's when the fighters hit. Fighters, 12 o'clock high. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s dove through the bomber formation like sharks through a school of fish. 20mm cannon shells ripped through Ye Olde Pub. The No. 3 engine exploded in flames. Charlie hit the fire extinguisher. Nothing. He shut down the fuel supply and feathered the propeller. The engine kept burning. "We're on fire! We're on fire!" Frenchie Coulomb shouted from the radio room. Another fighter screamed past, guns blazing. The No. 4 engine shuddered and died, prop windmilling uselessly. Now they had only 2 engines. A B-17 could theoretically fly on 2 engines, but not at 27,000 feet. Not while damaged. Not while under attack. Ye Olde Pub began to fall. Charlie pushed the yoke forward into a shallow dive, desperately trying to maintain enough airspeed to keep the aircraft controllable. 23,000 feet. 20,000 feet. The formation, their only protection, was pulling away above them, maintaining altitude, heading for home. Standard orders: stay with the formation. Don't slow down for stragglers. Charlie watched his squadron disappear into the clouds. They were alone. 15,000 feet. Another fighter made a head-on pass. 20mm shells walked up the fuselage. The oxygen system exploded. Pinky Luke was blown backwards, unconscious. The intercom went dead. Charlie couldn't talk to his crew. He didn't know who was alive or dead. 10,000 feet. In the tail section, Hugh Ecke Eckenrode sat frozen in his turret, not from fear, but from the 50°F temperature and lack of oxygen. He was already dead. In the ball turret beneath the aircraft, Alex Yelisanko cranked his turret around, searching for fighters. His guns were jammed. He was helpless. 5,000 feet. Finally, blessedly, the air grew thick enough to breathe without oxygen. Charlie leveled off at 2,000 feet, just above the German countryside. The bomber was barely flying. The controls felt like they were made of concrete. Every movement required all of Charlie's strength. He looked to his right. His co-pilot, Robert Andrews, was slumped forward, unconscious from oxygen deprivation, his face gray. Charlie was alone in the cockpit, and then Sam Blackford, the flight engineer, climbed down from the top turret. "How bad is it?" Charlie shouted over the screaming wind. Sam staggered to the back of the aircraft to check on the crew. When he returned, his face was white. "Ecke's dead. Pinky and Al are hurt bad. Doc Petchote took shrapnel in the leg. The whole plane is shot to hell. We've got holes you could throw a cat through." "Can we make it to England?" Sam looked at the instruments. 2 engines destroyed. Hydraulics failing. Control cables barely responding. "I don't know, sir. I honest to God don't know." Charlie checked his compass. England was 250 miles northwest across German-occupied territory, the North Sea, and German coastal defenses. It might as well have been on the moon. But what other choice did they have? "We're going home," Charlie said. He turned the dying bomber northwest. That's when Franz Stigler found them. While Charlie Brown fought to keep his bomber in the air, another pilot was landing at Jever Airfield in northern Germany. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, 27 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall, sharp features, intense eyes, and the quiet confidence of a man who'd survived hundreds of combat missions. Franz was not a Nazi. He joined the Luftwaffe in 1935, before Hitler's true intentions became clear. He flew because he loved flying. He fought because his country was at war. But he'd never loved the killing. Franz Stigler came from a family of pilots. His older brother August had been his hero, a World War I fighter ace, a man who lived by a code of honor that transcended national boundaries. August had told Franz something before he died in a peacetime flying accident in 1939. "You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy. You fight by rules to keep your humanity." Those words had shaped how Franz viewed combat. He'd shot down 27 Allied aircraft, bombers, and fighters, but he'd never strafed parachuting pilots. He'd never attacked the defenseless. He followed the rules. His mentor, Gustav Rödel, one of Germany's top aces, had taught him the chivalric code of aerial combat. You are fighter pilots first, last, always. If you see a pilot in the water, you drop your life raft. If you see a pilot in a parachute, you don't shoot. And if you see a crippled aircraft struggling home, you honor the bravery of the men inside. But those rules were becoming harder to follow. By December 1943, the war had become increasingly brutal. The SS had infiltrated every branch of the military. Officers who showed weakness toward the enemy faced courts-martial, or worse. Franz had already been warned once for refusing to execute Soviet prisoners. His squadron commander had looked the other way, but the warning was clear. Show mercy again and you'll face the consequences. That morning, Franz had already flown 2 missions against the Bremen raid. He'd shot down 2 B-17s, both clean kills, aircraft destroyed quickly without prolonged suffering. His score now stood at 27. 28 would earn him the Knight's Cross, the Ritterkreuz, Germany's highest military decoration. Only the Luftwaffe's elite wore it. Gustav Rodel had pulled him aside that morning. "One more, Franz. One more and you'll have it. You deserve it." After landing from his second sortie, Franz was exhausted. He'd been flying for 3 hours in combat, dealing with G-forces, adrenaline, and the constant fear that at any second an American gunner would get lucky. He was climbing out of his Bf-109 when a ground crewman shouted, "Oberleutnant, bomber, low altitude, heading northwest." Franz looked up. In the distance, barely above the trees, a lone B-17 was limping across the sky, a straggler. Separated from its formation, flying so low it was vulnerable to anything. Flak, fighters, even small arms fire from the ground. It was the easiest kill Franz would ever get. His crewmen were already refueling and rearming his fighter. Fresh ammunition belts for the machine guns, 20mm cannon shells, full fuel tanks. "Are you going after it, sir?" the crew chief asked. Franz looked at the distant bomber. From here it looked like a toy, small, fragile, already dying. "One more kill, the Knight's Cross." "Ja," Franz said quietly. "Prepare the aircraft." At 12:10 hours, Franz Stigler's Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6 roared down the runway at Yevor Airfield. The 109 was a beautiful aircraft, sleek, fast, deadly. Armed with 2 13mm machine guns and a single 20mm cannon, it could tear a bomber apart in seconds. Franz climbed to 3,000 feet and turned his fighter northwest, following the bomber's heading. It took him less than 5 minutes to spot his target. Even from 2 miles away, he could see it was in trouble. The bomber was barely above the treetops, no more than 500 feet altitude. It was yawing left and right, struggling to maintain heading. Black smoke poured from one engine. Franz pushed his throttle forward and closed the distance. Standard attack procedure: approach from behind and below, the bomber's blind spot. Pull up beneath the tail. Fire a burst into the fuselage and engines. Watch it fall. Quick, clean, effective. Franz armed his weapons. He closed to 1,000 feet, 500 feet. He could see every detail now, the American markings, the squadron letters, the battle damage. 300 feet. He pulled up behind the bomber's tail, perfectly positioned. The tail gunner's position was right in front of him. Franz's thumb moved to the firing button, and then he saw something that made his blood run cold. The tail gunner wasn't moving. The entire tail section was shredded, metal peeled back like torn paper. The gunner slumped forward, clearly dead or unconscious. Franz eased his fighter to the right, moving alongside the bomber's waist. Through the gaping holes in the fuselage, he could see inside the aircraft. And what he saw made him forget about the Knight's Cross. He saw wounded men. A waist gunner slumped against the fuselage, blood soaking his flight suit. Another crewman trying to bandage someone's wounds with trembling hands. The ball turret gunner trapped in his position, his turret jammed, his face pressed against the glass, staring at Franz with the expression of a man already dead. Franz moved forward alongside the cockpit. The co-pilot was unconscious, head lolling to the side. The pilot, barely more than a boy, was struggling with the controls, blood running down his face from a head wound. And then Charlie Brown turned his head and looked directly at Franz. Their eyes met, 20 feet apart. 2 pilots, 2 enemies, 2 young men who should have been killing each other. For a long moment, neither moved. Franz could see everything, the terror in Charlie's eyes, the exhaustion, the determination to get his crew home. And Charlie could see Franz's face, not the faceless enemy, but a human being. Another pilot, another man just trying to survive this war. Franz's thumb was still on the firing button. 1 burst. That's all it would take. And then Franz remembered his brother's words. "You fight by rules to keep your humanity." He remembered Gustav Rodel's code. If you see a crippled aircraft struggling home, you honor the bravery of the men inside. And he remembered something else, something from years ago when he was learning to fly. His instructor had told him about the First World War, about pilots who had saluted enemy flyers before shooting them down, about men who had dropped wreaths over enemy airfields to honor fallen opponents, about chivalry, about honor. about the line between warrior and murderer. Franz looked at the dying bomber and the dying crew inside it, and he made his choice. He didn't fire. Instead, he moved his fighter into close formation off the bomber's right wing. Charlie Brown stared at him in shock and confusion. What was this German doing? Why wasn't he shooting? Franz caught Charlie's eye and shook his head slowly. No, I'm not going to kill you. Hand signal, Franz waves at Charlie. Then Franz did something even more incredible. He began to escort the American bomber toward the North Sea. For the next 30 minutes, Franz Stigler became the guardian angel of Ye Olde Pub. He stayed glued to the bomber's right wing, so close that Charlie could count the rivets on the Messerschmitt's fuselage, so close that German anti-aircraft gunners on the ground could see them flying together. Charlie didn't understand what was happening. Was this German escorting them, or herding them toward a prisoner of war camp? Sam Blackford climbed back into the cockpit. "What the hell is that Kraut doing?" Sam shouted over the wind. "I don't know," Charlie shouted back. "But he could have killed us 10 times by now." Franz stayed in formation, flying so close that his wingtip was barely 20 feet from the bomber's wingtip. Every few seconds, Franz would glance over at Charlie and make gestures, pointing north. "Keep going this direction. Thumbs up. You're doing good." Waving motion. "Stay low. Don't climb." Charlie began to understand. This German pilot wasn't trying to capture them, he was trying to save them. But Franz was putting himself in mortal danger. As they flew northwest across German-occupied Holland, German anti-aircraft batteries spotted them. At first, the gunners assumed the Bf-109 was escorting a captured American bomber to a German airfield, a trophy to be displayed and studied. But then one battery commander realized what was actually happening. The German fighter was protecting an enemy aircraft. The anti-aircraft guns trained on both aircraft. Franz saw the guns tracking them. He pulled even closer to the B-17, so close that firing on the bomber would mean hitting his fighter as well. The German gunners hesitated, shooting down one of their own pilots to kill an enemy bomber. The decision was above their pay grade. They held their fire. Charlie saw the flak batteries and his heart sank. They were so close to the coast, so close to safety. Franz saw Charlie's despair. He knew what the pilot was thinking. Franz pulled ahead slightly and waggled his wings, the international signal for "follow me." He was going to lead them through the coastal defenses. The German coastline bristled with anti-aircraft guns, 80mm flak batteries, 37mm quick-firing cannons, even machine gun positions. It was the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's impenetrable defense against Allied invasion. Franz flew directly toward the heaviest concentration of defenses at Wilhelmshaven. Charlie's hands tightened on the yoke. Was this a trap? Was the German leading them into a kill zone? But Franz had calculated something else. The coastal batteries had strict orders. Don't fire on Luftwaffe aircraft without positive identification. By staying close to the B-17, by making the gunners think this was an official escort, Franz could shield the bomber through the gauntlet. They flew directly over the gun positions. Charlie could see the anti-aircraft crew staring up at them, confused. Some gunners trained their weapons, others waved. One battery commander grabbed his telephone, frantically calling headquarters for instructions. By the time anyone could authorize firing, both aircraft had crossed the coastline. They were over the North Sea. Franz stayed with the bomber for another 5 miles over the water, far enough that they were clear of German airspace. Then he knew he had to turn back. His fuel was running low. If he went any further, he wouldn't make it home. Franz pulled alongside Charlie's cockpit one final time. The two pilots looked at each other. Charlie raised his right hand slowly, a gesture of thanks, of respect, of disbelief. Franz returned the salute. And then Franz did something that Charlie would remember for the rest of his life. Franz formed his hand into a pistol shape, finger extended, thumb raised, and pointed it at Charlie. Then he made a bang motion and shook his head. The message was clear. I could have killed you, but I didn't. And I never will. Franz peeled away to the right, banking sharply back toward Germany. Charlie watched the Messerschmitt disappear into the clouds. For a moment he wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing. Then Sam Blackford said quietly, "Did that really just happen?" Charlie nodded, still staring at the empty sky where the German had been. "Yeah," he whispered. "It did." Ye Olde Pub staggered across the North Sea on 2 engines, leaking fuel, barely controllable. Charlie coaxed every last bit of power from the dying aircraft. At 14:45 hours, after nearly 7 hours in the air, they crossed the English coast at Lowestoft. Charlie aimed for the first airfield he could find, RAF Seething, an emergency landing strip for damaged bombers. The tower cleared them for immediate landing. Charlie lowered the landing gear, praying the hydraulics would hold. One main gear extended, the other stuck halfway. No time to fix it. Charlie brought the bomber in with one gear up and one gear down, nearly 100 Mann faster than normal to maintain control. The bomber hit the runway hard. The collapsed gear crumpled. The aircraft skidded sideways, shrieking metal and sparks, and then finally it stopped. Silence. They were alive. As the crew climbed out of the wreckage, American ground crews and medical personnel rushed forward. They stopped dead when they saw the damage. Olde Pub was destroyed. Over 400 bullet and shell holes. 2 engines completely destroyed. Nose section blown away. Tail section shredded. Oxygen system destroyed. Hydraulics barely functional. Control surfaces damaged. Entire fuselage perforated. One mechanic said flatly, "This aircraft is unflyable. It's a miracle you made it back." Another asked, How the hell are you even alive?" Charlie looked at Sam Blackford. Sam looked at Charlie. They were both thinking the same thing. The German pilot. Without him, they would never have made it past the coastal defenses, but Charlie said nothing. How could he explain that a German fighter pilot, an enemy ace, had saved their lives? Who would believe him? The crew was taken to the base hospital and then to intelligence debriefing. Charlie sat across from a stone-faced intelligence officer and recounted the mission. The flak over Bremen. The fighter attacks. The damage to the aircraft. The struggle to get home. The officer took notes. "And after you left the target area?" he asked. Charlie hesitated. We had an encounter with an enemy fighter." The officer looked up. "Explain." "A Bf-109 intercepted us at low altitude over Germany." "And?" Charlie took a deep breath. "And he escorted us out. He protected us. He flew with us to the coast and let us go." The officer stared at him. "Lieutenant Brown, are you telling me that a German fighter pilot escorted you out of German airspace?" "Yes, sir." "Why didn't he shoot you down?" "I don't know, sir." The officer wrote something in his notebook and closed it with a snap. "Lieutenant, I'm going to give you some advice. Don't tell this story to anyone else. People will think the stress of combat has affected your judgment. Do you understand?" Charlie understood. He never mentioned the German pilot again. Not to his commanders, not to the press, not even to his family. For 46 years, Charlie Brown kept Franz Stigler's mercy a secret, but he never forgot. He never forgot the face of the German pilot who could have killed him, and he never stopped wondering who was he? Did he survive the war? And would they ever meet again? On December 20th, 1943, Franz Stigler landed his Messerschmitt at Jever Airfield. His crew chief ran up to him. "Did you get it, Oberleutnant? Did you get your 28th? Franz climbed out of his fighter and looked at the man. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't find anything." That was all he said. Franz never reported the encounter. He never told his commander. He never told his squadron mates. If anyone discovered that he'd let an enemy bomber escape, worse, that he'd actively protected it, Franz would face a court-martial. The penalty for aiding the enemy was execution. Gustav Rodel noticed that Franz seemed troubled after that mission, but he didn't press. Combat did strange things to men's minds. Sometimes a pilot needed silence more than conversation. Franz flew hundreds more missions during the war. He shot down more aircraft. His final total would be 28 confirmed kills. He was never awarded the Knight's Cross. He stayed 1 kill short for the rest of the war. Sometimes late at night, Franz would think about the American bomber and wonder, did they make it home? Did the wounded men survive? He had no way of knowing, and he never spoke of it. Franz Stigler survived the war. On April 24, 1945, with Germany collapsing, Franz flew his last mission. He was shot down by American P-47 fighters and spent several hours evading capture in the Bavarian countryside before finally surrendering to American troops. He spent 6 months as a prisoner of war. When he was released, he returned to his hometown to find his family home destroyed by Allied bombing. His mother had survived. His younger brother had been killed on the Eastern Front. Germany was in ruins. Franz Stigler had fought honorably for 5 years. He'd followed the code his brother taught him. He'd survived when so many others had died, and he'd never told anyone about the American bomber he'd spared. Charlie Brown also survived the war. After the Bremen mission, he flew several more combat missions before completing his tour and returning to the United States. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for bringing his damaged aircraft and crew home safely on December 20th, 1943. But he never told anyone about the German pilot, not during the war, not after the war. Charlie married, he had a family, he built a successful career, but the memory of that day haunted him. He kept thinking about the face of the German pilot, so young, so close, so real. He kept thinking about the choice that pilot had made. Why? Why did he spare us? 40 years passed. Franz Stigler emigrated to Canada in 1953, settling in Vancouver. He became an accomplished businessman. He built a life far from the war, but he never forgot the American bomber. Charlie Brown retired to Florida. He joined veterans organizations. He attended reunions with his old crew, but he never told the story. By the 1980s, most of the crew of Olde Pub had passed away. Charlie was one of the few survivors, and he realized if he didn't find the German pilot soon, the truth would die with him. He had to try. In 1986, Charlie Brown decided to break his silence. He wrote a letter to a military aviation newsletter, carefully crafting his words. To the German fighter pilot who escorted a badly damaged B-17 out of Germany on December 20th, 1943. I was the pilot of that aircraft. I have spent 43 years wondering who you were and whether you survived the war. I would very much like to meet you and thank you for sparing my crew and me. If you are that pilot, or if you know who he was, please contact me. Charlie Brown, Lieutenant Colonel, Brigade, USAF, Ret. He sent the letter to multiple aviation magazines and veteran organizations, and then he waited. Days passed, weeks, months, nothing. Charlie began to think the German pilot had died during the war, that his savior had been killed by American or British fighters, by flak, by the 1,000 random chances of combat. He'd never know. In January 1990, more than 4 years after Charlie sent his letter, a phone call changed everything. Franz Stigler was reading a Canadian aviation magazine when he saw Charlie's letter reprinted. He read it once, then again, then a third time, his hands shaking. December 20th, 1943. A B-17 over Germany. An escort to the coast. It was him. The American pilot was alive, and he was looking for him. Franz sat in his living room for an hour, staring at the letter, his mind racing through memories, 46 years old. Finally, he picked up the phone. He dialed the number Charlie had included in the letter. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice. Hello? Franz took a deep breath. Is this Lieutenant Charlie Brown? He asked, his voice heavy with a German accent. Yes. Who is this? My name is Franz Stigler. I believe I escorted your B-17 to safety over Germany in December 1943. Silence. Then Charlie's voice, cracking with emotion. I've been looking for you for 46 years. For the next 3 hours, Charlie and Franz talked. Franz described details only the German pilot could have known. The bomber had been at extremely low altitude, no more than 500 feet. 2 engines were destroyed, 1 on fire. The tail gunner was clearly dead or unconscious. The nose was blown apart. There were gaping holes in the fuselage. The pilot had a head wound and blood on his face. The co-pilot was slumped over, unconscious. Charlie confirmed every detail. Why? Charlie finally asked. Why did you let us go? Franz was quiet for a moment. I couldn't kill you, he said simply. You were already dead. Your crew was wounded. Your aircraft was destroyed. You were no longer warriors. You were victims. And I am a fighter pilot, not an executioner. Charlie felt tears running down his face. You saved my life. You saved my crew. And you honored me by surviving, Franz replied, by getting your men home safely. That took more courage than anything I did. They talked about the war, about the friends they'd lost, about the things they'd seen. 2 former enemies now connected by a moment of mercy that had defined both their lives. Before they hung up, Franz said, I think we should meet. Yes, Charlie said. God, yes. In June 1990, Franz Stigler flew from Vancouver to Seattle to meet Charlie Brown. Neither man knew what to expect. Would it be awkward? Would old animosities resurface? Would the reality destroy the memory? Franz walked into the airport terminal and saw an elderly man standing near the gate, scanning the crowd. Their eyes met. Recognition was instant. Despite 46 years, despite age and gray hair and the passage of time, they knew each other. They'd stared at each other across 20 feet of sky when they were young men, and that moment had burned itself into both their souls. Charlie walked toward Franz. Franz walked toward Charlie. And when they met, they embraced like brothers. Both men wept. Thank you, Charlie said. Thank you for my life. Thank you, Franz replied, for letting me stay human. For the next 18 years, Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler were inseparable friends. They visited each other regularly. They attended air shows and veteran reunions together. They told their story to schools, museums, and military organizations. They collaborated on a book about their experience. 2 former enemies who had become closer than brothers, bound by a moment of mercy in the darkest of times. Charlie said, Franz gave me my life, not just that day, but every day since. knowing that honor and humanity could exist even in war, that saved me from bitterness and hate. Franz said, Charlie proved that the choice I made was right, that mercy is never weakness, that we are defined not by who we kill, but by who we save. Franz Stigler died on March 22, 2008, at age 92, in Vancouver, British Columbia. Charlie Brown died 7 months later, on November 24, 2008, at age 87, in Miami, Florida. They are buried on opposite sides of the continent, thousands of miles apart. But in the last interview before his death, Charlie said something that captured the meaning of their story. Franz and I were enemies for one day, but we were brothers for 18 years, and I think that says more about humanity than any battle ever could. Their story remained mostly unknown until 2012, when author Adam Makos published A Higher Call, an incredible true story of combat and chivalry in the war-torn skies of World War II. The book became a bestseller. Steven Spielberg's production company acquired the film rights. Their story has been taught in military academies around the world as an example of honor in combat. It's been featured in documentaries, magazine articles, and museum exhibits. And it stands as proof that even in humanity's darkest hours, even in the midst of total war, individual human beings can still choose mercy over vengeance, compassion over cruelty, honor over expedience. December 20th, 1943 was just one day in a war that lasted 6 years. One mission among thousands, one decision among millions. But for 10 American airmen aboard Olde Pub, it was the day they were supposed to die. And for one German pilot, it was the day he chose to be human instead of a killer. Franz Stigler could have had his Knight's Cross. He could have been celebrated as a hero. Instead, he risked execution to save 10 enemy airmen he'd never met. Because as he said years later, I didn't save them for their country, I didn't save them for politics, I saved them because they were human beings. And I am a human being, and in that moment, that was all that mattered. This was not a story of Germans and Americans. This was a story of humans. And that's the story that matters. The crew of Olde Pub who survived that day, Charlie Brown, pilot, died 2008, Robert Andrews, co-pilot, died 1987, Spencer Luke, navigator, died 2003, Al Sedok, bombardier, died 1997, Sam Blackford, flight engineer, died 1999, Bertrand Coulombe, radio operator, died 1991, Alex Yelasanko, ball turret gunner, died 2007, Richard Pechout, waist gunner, died 2005, Lloyd Jennings, waist gunner, died 1998, Hugh Eckenrode, tail gunner, killed in action, December 20th, 1943, age 21, Franz Stigler, Luftwaffe. Oberleutnant, 28 confirmed victories, died 2008. Their story reminds us that war is not fought by nations, it's fought by human beings. And human beings, even in war's darkest moments, can still choose honor, can still choose mercy, can still choose humanity. For you, the war lasted one day. For me, the war lasted 6 years. But for both of us, that one moment of mercy lasted a lifetime.